This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzahon, and it's Monday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance and Magic's highest level of competition. A couple of weeks ago, we took a look at multicolored sorceries, which ultimately ended up being a pretty impressive list. Today, we're looking at a list that's even more impressive, multicolored instants. On average, multicolored cards tend to be more powerful than monocolored ones. This is because the requirement of mana of more than one color allows the cards to be a bit more powerful. This is because they cost mana of more than one color, and that allows them to give the cards more powerful effects. After all, if it's a little bit harder to cast, you should expect a better effect. And yeah, the cards on this list are really powerful, making for one of the most stacked MTG top 10s ever. The number 10 card on this list has 82 points, and the top 7 cards all have more than 100. For comparison, the number 10 card on the multicolored sorcery list only had 32 points, and only the top 3 cards had over 100. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have the instant card type and be multicolored. In all, there were 303 cards eligible for this list, and in this video, we'll take a look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours and World Championships, and second tier top 8s are worth 1 point. This includes events like Grand Prix and Magic Fests. Alright, let's get to our list. At number 10, it's Electrolyze. This multicolored instant has the potential to give you a 3-for-1, because it can pick off a couple of X1 creatures and it replaces itself. Obviously, that's the ideal situation and it doesn't always come up, but even killing one thing and drawing a card is a 2-for-1, and it can even go to the dome if you need to finish your opponent off. Over the years, it's been successful in multiple formats, and it is particularly popular in control decks. It's been played the most by far in Modern, where it's been played in just about every blue-red control deck the format has ever seen, including Splinter Twin, Delver, Blue Moon, and Jeskai Control. It also got reprinted in Strixhaven's Mystical Archive, which has given it legality in Historic, where it's also gained a few points, and I would imagine it's going to keep gaining points there in the future, as well as in Modern. Although it isn't gaining points at a super high rate, so it isn't out of the question that it could be passed on this list in the future. At number 9, it is Dovin's Veto. This multicolored instant is a good example of how it's possible to soup up a monocolored spell by making it multicolored, since it has the same mana value and effect as Negate, a card that sees a ton of play already, but by switching out the one generic mana for a white mana symbol, you get a better Negate, one that can't be countered. While it only made its debut in 2019, Dovin's Veto has already gone on to have significant multi-format success, including in Magic's most powerful format, Vintage. After all, control decks love the idea of having a counterspell that opposing control players can't counter. Winning a war of counterspells in those games is a pretty big deal. Combo decks also really love the Veto since they can use it to protect their combo from both removal and counter magic. The Veto is going to continue to be played in pretty much all of Magic's formats, and it has a good chance to move up this list going forward. At number 8, it's Unlicensed Disintegration. This multicolored instant is a very nice removal spell for artifact decks since it not only allows you to kill an opposing creature fairly efficiently, it also bolts your opponent in the face if you have an artifact. That can be particularly spicy if you use it to get a blocker out of the way, suddenly opening the opponent up to a bunch of damage on top of the 3 damage Disintegration does. Unlike the other cards in this list, Unlicensed Disintegration gained every single one of its points in its standard format, where it was really heavily played. Kaladesh Standard had a ton of artifacts in it, with many decks in the format having an artifact sub-theme at the very least, including aggro decks, which could run efficient aggressive creatures like Beaumont Courier and Scrap Heap Scrounger, along with vehicles. Unlicensed Disintegration was the most popular in aggressive decks that ran those 2 creatures, where the bolt attached to the card was at its best. It hasn't gained any points since rotating out of Standard, though it has seen a bit of play in Historic and Pioneer, and it has a little bit of a chance at adding to its score in the future. Even if it does, the other cards on this list are gaining points at such a high rate that I think Unlicensed Disintegration's days on this list are numbered. At number 7, it's Terminate, the first card on the list to break 100 points. This multicolored instant does the same thing as Unlicensed Disintegration, without the artifact upside, but it also costs 1 mana less. It also has the upside of not letting the creature regenerate, which actually came up some in the old days. Basically, Terminate is just a great removal spell. It was originally printed in Planeshift in 2001, but it also received a reprint in 2009's Alara Reborn. It's taken advantage of both of those printings, seeing play in both standard formats. The 2009 reprint also means it's legal in Modern, where it's been the most prolific. Most decks that feature both black and red have run Terminate in Modern over the years, but Jund and Death's Shadow have been the decks where it's done the most work. We can expect Terminate to keep on gaining points. At number 6, we've got Fire and Ice, a split card that is collectively a multicolored instant. Each individual side of the card can be cast using only a single color of mana, but the card provides some pretty powerful modalities since you can choose either side. I always think Fire and Ice is a great card for expressing just how powerful modality is in Magic, since neither side of this card is individually that impressive. They're both fine cards, but not something that would see that much play individually. But having the option to do one or the other on a single card really matters. Fire and Ice has seen play in every single one of Magic's formats. One of the sweetest decks it was part of was extended Isochron Scepter decks. With the rules at the time, the mana value of a card was based on the value of an individual spell on it. So, Fire and Ice had a mana value of 2 and could be put on the Scepter. The really sweet thing was every time you used a Scepter with an imprinted Fire and Ice, you got to choose which side you wanted. And you didn't lose any of the modality. Unfortunately, that rule has since been changed, and now Fire and Ice has a mana value of 4, and it can't be put on the Scepter. That's okay though, because Fire and Ice is pretty heavily played in control decks in every format it's legal in. For a long time it wasn't legal in Modern, so it didn't have any points there, but it got a reprint in Modern Horizons 2 in 2021, and it's now seeing a lot of play in that format too, where it's been the most successful in crashing Footfalls decks. It's pretty nice in Cascade decks in general, because it allows you to run something that your Cascade spells sees as a 4 mana value card, but you're able to cast either side for 2 mana in the earlier part of the game, before you cast your 3 mana Cascade spell to hit your Footfalls. So, funnily enough, the rules change that weakened Fire and Ice in terms of how it could be used with Isochron Scepter actually made it a lot better for Cascade decks. It's in a great position to gain more points going forward. At number 5, it's Lightning Helix. This multicolored instant is one of the best burn spells in the game, since it allows you to not only do 3 to something, you also get to gain 3 life. This makes it an appealing card for burn decks, but also more controlling decks, who can really benefit from simultaneously removing a creature and gaining some life. While it was played in both Block and Standard, Extended was the format where it first truly dominated. It was played there mostly in aggro decks like Burn, Boros Aggro, Red Deck Wins, and Zoo. It's been played the most, by far, in Modern, where it's been played since the format began in 2011. In that format, it's played in a lot of the same types of decks it was played in Extended, in other words, aggro and burn decks, but it's also been played in decks like Jeskai Control and Niv Mizzet Reborn. Like Electrolyze, the Helix was reprinted in Strixhaven's Mystical Archive, making it legal in Historic, where it's already gained some points. It's going to keep adding to its score in the future. At number 4, we have Kolaghan's Command. Like all commands, Kolaghan's Command gives you 4 options from which you can choose 2. Basically, no matter what you choose, you get some pretty impressive value for only 3 mana, as most of your choices will give you a 2-for-1. If you destroy an artifact and make your opponent discard, you get 2 cards for the price of 1. The same is true if you do 2 damage to a creature and kill it, and return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and you get the picture. Pretty much all the options give you 2 cards. It's also nice that it lets you run some main board artifact hate, because even if that option is irrelevant, you have 3 good ones remaining. This power has led to the command seeing play in multiple formats. In Standard, it was played in a pretty wide variety of decks. This included more aggressive decks as well as control decks. It's found the most success in Modern, like a lot of cards on this list, finding its way into most decks that are playing both black and red. This has included combo decks like Splinter Twin and Living End, mid-range decks like Jund, control decks like Grixis, and aggro decks like Death's Shadow. There's not really a good reason not to have a Kolaghan's Command or 2 in your 75 in Modern. It's also found success in Legacy, where it's been featured in Delver and 4-color control. The creation of the Pioneer format has been great for the command too, where it just might be one of the most powerful instants in the whole format. More recently, it became legal in Historic, and it's already gained some points there too, and one has to imagine more points are coming. At number 3, it's Dromoka's Command, our second consecutive Dragons of Tarkir command. This one gives you awesome modes for only 2 mana. For example, if your opponent has an enchantment, you can make your opponent sacrifice it. and then fight one of their creatures with your larger creature, and that's a 2-for-1. You can also set up blocks, make one of your creatures big enough to survive combat with the counter, and then use another creature to fight something else, also generating a 2-for-1, and it can also prevent damage, although that mode isn't used that often. While in Standard, Dromoka's Command was a format-defining card as it was one of the most played cards in the entire format. It had no problem transitioning to new decks as others rotated out. In its early days, it was mostly featured in Abzan, but then it moved on to Megamorph, Green-White Tokens, and Collected Company. It also has a few points in Modern, and more recently Pioneer, but it mostly makes this list on the strength of its performance in Standard. Even a historic legal reprint hasn't allowed it to gain more points, so unless it can improve its score in the near future, the more active cards behind it are going to pass it. At number 2, it's Assassin's Trophy. This multicolored instant can destroy any permanent for only 2 mana. Obviously, if that's where the card ended, it would be utterly broken, but instead it's merely insanely powerful since it does come with a downside. Your opponent gets to search their library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield, and it even comes down untapped. Still, the flexibility and efficiency of the card have made it hugely successful, especially for a card that's only about 4 years old. It has seen play in all of Magic's competitive formats, and it's a staple in many of them because of the combination of its efficiency and flexibility. However, there is another Golgari removal spell that is ahead of it on this list, and by a lot, and that card is Abrupt Decay. So yeah, the top 2 cards on this list are Golgari removal spells. Like many cards on this list, Abrupt Decay is a staple in multiple formats. 2 mana to deal with any 3 mana value or less non-land permanent is great, and that is especially true because it can't be countered, meaning you don't have to worry about your opponent finding a way to stop you from blowing something up. While it had some success in Block and Standard, it gets even better in non-rotating formats where it can target just about every single card in most decks, since mana values tend to run a lot lower. If you're playing against a black-green deck in Modern, Legacy, Pioneer, or Vintage, there's a good chance your opponent is packing a few of these. It has a massive lead on the cards behind it, and it seems likely to continue to outpace them, even Assassin's Trophy. So, those are the 10 multicolored instants that have left the biggest mark on competitive Magic. It was quite the impressive list. If you want to own any of these super powerful spells, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each of them. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future editions of MTG Top 10, do me a favor and subscribe and turn on your notifications. If you want to catch up on past MTG Top 10s, and there are over 450 of them, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can on Patreon. Thanks for watching.